Hello everyone. Have you ever wondered how health authorities actually know whether the water flowing into your home is truly safe long before anyone falls ill? The answer lies in a continuous and vigilant process called surveillance. And today we are going to walk through an 8-tier defense system for drinking water quality surveillance, a comprehensive framework that combines field assessment, microscopic diagnostics, chemical interventions, and source protection. Drinking water supply surveillance is the continuous and vigilant public health assessment of the safety and acceptability of water supplies. It is fundamentally a health measure intended to protect the public from waterborne diseases, and it moves through 8 interconnected tiers, starting with core principles and approvals, followed by field assessment and sampling, bacteriological diagnostics, biological examination, chemical and security surveillance, water hardness mitigation, fluoride optimization, and finally source selection and protection. Let us begin with why sanitary surveys matter so much. No bacteriological or chemical examination can ever replace a sanitary survey because pollution is often intermittent and can easily escape isolated laboratory testing. A sanitary survey provides an on the spot evaluation of the entire system, which allows laboratory results to be interpreted accurately. Certain zones demand special attention during these surveys, including low pressure zones, areas with high leakage, dead ends on pipelines, and densely populated areas lacking proper sewerage. There are also specific diagnostic triggers that call for a sanitary survey, such as when a new water source is being contemplated, when laboratory analysis indicates a hazard to health, when an outbreak of waterborne disease occurs, or when industrial changes take place in the watershed. Once a survey identifies where to look, the next step is sampling, and sampling must be executed with the thoroughness of a surgical operation because the entirety of the surveillance framework relies on the aseptic conditions maintained during this single step. This process involves three critical components. First, personnel, since sampling must be carried out exclusively by trained personnel adhering to WHO and ICMR standards. Second, handling, which requires strict aseptic precautions to prevent contamination by the operator or the environment. And third, transport, since if on the spot inoculation is not possible, samples must be packed in ice and sent expeditiously to the analytical laboratory. Now we move into bacteriological diagnostics, where the focus is on tracking the invisible fecal threat. The World Health Organization recommends the measurement of E. coli as the definitive indicator of water quality, with a strict guideline of less than 1 E. coli per 100 milliliters of drinking water. Alongside this primary indicator, there are secondary confirmatory indicators as well. Fecal streptococci provide critical confirmatory evidence of fecal pollution in doubtful cases, while Clostridium perfringens acts as an additional hardy biological marker confirming the presence of severe and often past fecal contamination. There are three main methods used to detect these bacteriological indicators, forming what we call the bacteriological method matrix. The multiple tube method involves inoculating measured quantities of 0.1, 1.0, 10, and 50 milliliters into McConkey's broth, taking 48 to 96 hours, and estimating the most probable number from statistical tables. The membrane filtration method filters a known volume through a cellulose ester membrane, where bacteria are retained and incubated face upwards, taking only 20 hours and giving a direct colony count that is significantly faster than the multiple tube method. And the Colilert method uses defined substrate technology to detect and quantify total coliforms and E. coli, offering rapid and standardized results with simpler operation and higher output, making it ideal for developing country settings. Let us look closer at how this presumptive coliform reaction actually works. The multiplication of fecal organisms produces a distinct chemical and physical signature in McConkey's lactose bile salt broth. A measured water sample is added to the broth, and after 48 hours at 37 degrees Celsius, two reactions confirm contamination. The acid reaction causes the mixture to turn a distinct pink color, while the gas reaction causes the formation of a gas bubble in an inverted tube. As a confirmatory step, the sample is subcultured in brilliant green bile broth at 37 degrees Celsius for coliforms and 44 degrees Celsius for E. coli gas production, with further indole tests conducted at 44 degrees Celsius. Colony counts on nutrient agar are also used to estimate general bacterial purity, since a sudden increase serves as the earliest indicator of contamination at the consumer endpoint. For disinfected water, the maximum permissible count is 0 colonies after 2 days at 37 degrees Celsius, or 20 colonies after 3 days at 22 degrees Celsius. For water that is not disinfected, the maximum permissible count is 10 colonies after 2 days at 37 degrees Celsius, or 100 colonies after 3 days at 22 degrees Celsius. Interestingly, plate count on yeast extract agar at 22 degrees Celsius for 7 days serves as the optimal microbiological indicator, since in the absence of residual chlorine, uninhibited bacterial growth over 7 days reveals the true baseline purity of the water. Biological examination extends beyond bacteria to include microscopic macroorganisms, collectively known as plankton, which serve as direct qualitative and quantitative indices of pollution. Their prevalence directly correlates with objectionable tastes and odors in the water supply, and the degree of pollution is assessed by mapping the specific type and prevailing numbers of these organisms. This plankton spectrum includes algae and fungi, yeast and protozoa, rotifers and crustaceans, and minute worms, each offering clues about the pollution status of the source. Moving to chemical and organic surveillance, routine tests trace industrial and agricultural pollutants by monitoring parameters such as pH, color, turbidity, chlorides, ammonia, chlorine demand, and residual chlorine. Heavy metals like iron and manganese are also tracked whenever they influence treatment efficacy. On the organic side, organic matter dictates the potential for heterotrophic bacterial regrowth, such as pseudomonads within distribution systems. While BOD and COD are primarily utilized for wastewater analysis, total organic carbon stands out as the sole reliable parameter applicable to drinking water organic surveillance. All of this comes together in what can be called the Total Quality Index. A sanitary survey is only truly verified when all three data streams align, namely the bacteriological and biological reality, meaning the absence of coliforms, plankton, and E. coli, the chemical and organic reality, meaning acceptable total organic carbon, hardness, and heavy metals, and the field and infrastructure reality, meaning a proper sanitary survey, awareness of pressure zones, and aseptic sampling. Only when all three circles overlap do we arrive at confirmed potability. Now let us turn to water hardness, which is measured in milliequivalents per liter, where 1 milliequivalent per liter equals 50 milligrams of calcium carbonate. Softening becomes necessary when hardness exceeds 3 milliequivalents per liter or 150 milligrams per liter. There are two types of hardness. Temporary or carbonate hardness is caused by calcium bicarbonate and magnesium bicarbonate, and it leads to boiler scaling and even explosions, immense fuel waste, and poor fabric life. Permanent or non-carbonate hardness is caused by calcium and magnesium sulfates, chlorides, and nitrates, and it results in heavy soap and detergent consumption along with indigestible cooked vegetables. Interestingly, there is also a cardiovascular correlation, since statistical associations link soft drinking water areas with higher prevalence of arteriosclerotic and degenerative heart disease, hypertension, and sudden cardiovascular deaths, which is why drinking water should ideally remain moderately hard. To manage this hardness, water treatment relies on hardness mitigation through the permuted process. While boiling removes temporary hardness by precipitating calcium carbonate, large scale municipal supplies require more advanced chemical exchange methods. Standard chemical interventions include lime addition, which absorbs carbon dioxide and precipitates insoluble calcium carbonate to remove temporary hardness, and soda ash or sodium carbonate, which removes both temporary and permanent hardness. In the permuted process itself, hard water containing calcium and magnesium ions passes through a zeolite resin bed, where complex sodium, aluminum, and silica compounds exchange their sodium cations for calcium and magnesium ions, producing soft water as the output. This system is capable of achieving zero hardness, though it requires mixing with raw water to prevent corrosion, and the resin bed is regenerated using a concentrated sodium chloride brine wash. Fluoride management requires similar precision. Fluorine is naturally present in water, but its concentration dictates a severe public health balance. Concentrations below zero point 0.5 parts per million are associated with dental caries and require fluoridation supplementation. The optimal concentration for countries with high water consumption like India falls between zero point 0.5 and zero point 0.8 parts per million, whereas temperate climates utilize a slightly higher value of 1.0 parts per million. Concentrations above 1.5 parts per million cause dental fluorosis, requiring defluoridation through the Nalgonda technique, and extreme excess can trigger severe skeletal fluorosis. The final and perhaps most strategic tier is source selection and protection. The ultimate defense against contamination is a proactive, well chosen origin point, and sources must be examined in the field by experienced sanitary surveyors covering seasonal variations prior to final selection. Five key factors guide this selection: quantity, meaning the source must have sufficient capacity for continuing demands, seasonal variations, and projected community growth; quality, meaning the source must be capable of meeting drinking water standards after treatment; protection, meaning the source should be naturally defended from human excreta, industrial discharge, and agricultural runoff; feasibility, meaning the source must be available at a reasonable and sustainable economic cost; and treatability, meaning the source should require the least possible treatment under locally prevailing conditions. So, what does all of this ultimately mean? Testing confirms what surveillance protects, and true water potability is never achieved in the laboratory alone. It requires the physical protection of the watershed, the surgical precision of sampling, and the rigorous chemical and bacteriological diagnostics of the laboratory, all working together as a single unified shield against waterborne disease. Together, the eye of the sanitary survey, the microscope of the bacteriological laboratory, and the filter of chemical intervention form the complete picture of water safety. Hope you have understood about surveillance of drinking water quality. If you found this video useful, please share with your friends and colleagues. Thank you.